Hey, it's Esther Kane with SeniorSafetyAdvice.com. Today I'm going to do part one of two videos, the main topic being on fall prevention. I was going to initially do them all in one video, but it just ended up being way too long. So I'm going to break it up. This first video is going to be basically on some stories of patients that I treated because of a fall. And their injuries, what happened, and so on. And then in the second half, the next video that I'll be doing is going to be on some prevention tips. Now, of course, you can't 100% guarantee that you're never going to fall, but you can at least do your best, right? And that's what this is all about. All right, so let's get going with this first video and the stories. And I'm hoping that these stories will help you to see how silly little things that happen that can take 1 second to occur can potentially affect the rest of your life. And not only your life, but your family and caregivers and friends and everybody else around you. So the idea is I'm trying to get you to be cautious and to think about what is around you, your surroundings and what you do. All right, so let's get to it. First, don't forget to subscribe, click the like button, you know what to do. All right, I wrote the stories down so I wouldn't forget because I tend to forget things. All right, so definitely we all know that falls are probably the #1 fear that a lot of elders have, and their caregivers and families as well. And for good reason, because the majority of reasons that people do end up in an ER, older people, is because of something due to a fall. So you want to, of course, try to avoid them. So these are true stories of patients that I treated as an occupational therapist, and they're all because of a fall. All right, one patient I had, I remember, he fell on a staircase simply because he didn't want to turn the light on because he wanted to save electricity. All right, I get that, I understand that. But he ended up missing a step that caused him to lose his balance, and he ended up tumbling down 4 steps. The end result was that he broke his leg and his wrist. Now, either from anesthesia or a combination of medications, I don't know, he had initially mild dementia, but after the surgeries, he had to have surgery on both leg and his wrist. He just came out of it definitely not well, and his dementia was much more exaggerated. It got to the point where literally he couldn't go back home again. And this was a guy who was living independently, taking care of his bills, doing everything that he needed to do fine. His dementia, of course, probably would have gotten worse, but not for quite a while. But this incident caused it accelerate very quickly. He was a very nice fellow too, a really big guy, but nice fellow. All right. The second one I have is a female patient that also fell on a staircase, and it was only like 5 or 6 steps. It wasn't like a big long staircase. But the reason she fell was because she was carrying a large laundry basket, you know, like clothes and towels. And so she was carrying this big thing, walking down the stairs, and of course she ended up slipping on the stairs or missing the step, and she ended up falling with, of course, the laundry basket, the towels, and everything else. And the reason she did that is because she didn't want to take multiple trips up and down the stairs. All right, I understand that, but really, is it worth it? Apparently for this one, it wasn't. So she ended up suffering several broken bones, the main one being her shoulder. And because she was in her late 70s, she really wasn't ever able to fully recover. And I only know that because I treated her in inpatient rehab, and then I treated her again in outpatient rehab. So she was in inpatient for several weeks, outpatient for several months, and even when she left, she wasn't able to fully, raise her shoulder, and of course caused her some pain. And now both of those incidences, saving electricity, all right, but how much could you possibly have saved? A penny, 2 pennies? The time that it took you to go up the stairs, and then you could turn the light off up there. And then the amount of time that, if you had to go up and down the stairs 2-3 times for the laundry and the towels and everything else, it would have been good exercise. She certainly could have done it, but after that, she had to live now with this limited range of motion in her shoulder simply because she didn't want to take that extra time. So think about it. Think about what is the safer way to do it, not necessarily the most easiest way to get around it. All right. I remember so clearly to this day a very fit and healthy woman in her early 70s. And I remember because she was so beautiful. She was really a very, very pretty woman. And she came in with a broken hip. Now, she was a ballroom dancer, and she was actually getting out of her car and to go into her dance class. And when she got out of her car, she bumped into a friend, another person going into the dance class. And she's busy talking away. You know how some women, girls can be, just talking away with someone, with her. And as she's walking, she just stumbled and tripped over those parking lot barriers, that the cars go up to. She tripped right over that, fell, broke her hip. I mean, she was a ballroom dancer. She was fit. She was, flexible, strong, mobile. She was doing great. But because of that one little incident, she broke her hip. She recovered fairly well. It was a few weeks that she was in rehab, and then a couple of months in, maybe a little more, in outpatient rehab. But I know she recovered well. I bumped into her several months later at a grocery store, and I asked her how she was doing. And she told me that she was still having pain in that hip, enough pain that she just couldn't complete an entire, do all her ballroom dancing that she had been doing before. So she had to cut that down, which was a shame because she really clearly loved it. But that, recovery doesn't always mean you have 100% recovery. And for her, that's how it was, at least several months after the incident. But I still remember her to this day, like she's right in front of me. All right. There are several stories that I can recall from my patients of a varying array of reasons of them falling because they stepped back to something. So either they stepped back to turn around or whatever reason. But when they stepped back, they either bumped into something or stepped on something, even a pet, or tripped over something, because clutter was in the way. Well, the pet wouldn't be clutter, but you get the idea. But because they ended up, stepping back and bumping into whatever, or tripping or slipping or whatever, they ended up injuring themselves. Now, most of these that I remember were just fractures. But again, as you get older, it takes much longer to recover from a fracture. And hopefully you recover 100%, at least 90%. Whatever it was, it caused them to lose their balance. And a lot of times it was just really because of clutter. There was only one time that I remember somebody stepped on a pet, but it's mostly because of clutter. All right, I recall two incidences where two separate patients slipped on ice. This is when I was working up in North Carolina. One was on the driveway and one was on the front steps of their home. And both of them were going to the mailbox to get mail. And the only reason the two of them, why they stick in my head, is because the two of them didn't want to take the time to get out of their house slippers and put on appropriate shoes that would have been better for gripping on the ice or snow, or just even avoiding going out there until that ice melted. But whatever reason, they kept on their house slippers, which were not appropriate for the weather. They walked out and they ended up slipping and falling and injuring themselves. Now, both of these were broken bones also. One guy, I remember, he broke his pelvis and ended up where he had to wear a metal halo around his pelvic, the kind with the pins that go in, and it looks very uncomfortable. It looks worse than it is, I know, but still, he ended up having to do that for several months. And the other one just suffered a broken wrist, which from personal experience I can tell you is quite painful. And he did not recover from that fully, simply because, again, he was older. I was lucky. I recovered like 90% of my wrist fracture, but I was a few years younger when that happened. But still, I mean, think about it. It took 5 minutes, would have taken 5 minutes to put on the proper shoes to go out there and get the mail, or just don't get the mail and wait until the ice melted. Yeah. Anyway, decisions we make that affect us, right? One very unfortunate fellow that I worked with, I had to write this down because the incidences, it was just one thing after the other. But I worked with him for many, many, many months as a head injury. It's a very kind of a sad story, really. Well, a lot of head injuries are sad stories, but this one. Anyway, he got up from his recliner, he was watching TV, got up from his recliner to get some water. He bumped into the corner of his coffee table, which when we did the home assessment was simply way too large for the space that he was in. Because he bumped into that coffee table with his knee, he injured his knee. It hurt. He buckled. He ended up falling. But because the room was so cluttered, when he fell, he hit his head on another piece of furniture, which was this big, long wooden storage unit. He hit his head on the edge of that thing, and he ended up laying on the floor unconscious for several hours before his daughter found him. He ended up with a fractured knee and a severe head injury, which, although he did end up coming out of a coma after several months, after a while, I don't know, several weeks, he never recovered. So I spent the next 6 months working with him just to teach him how to feed himself again, with a fork and a spoon. And that is how he went home. The only thing he pretty much could do was to feed himself. And before that, he was completely independent. Maybe a bit of a hoarder, but completely independent. So when I talk about decluttering, and I've spoken about that before, written several articles, mentioned it in several articles, that's what I think of. It's just so important to get rid of excess stuff in your house. It's simply not worth it with stories like this. All right, last one. I truly lost count of how many patients I worked with who suffered an injury because of a frickin' throw rug. I know, physical therapists, occupational therapists, throw rugs are the bane of our existence. It's true, because we end up arguing with all our patients about removing those throw rugs. There are 2 reasons the throw rugs are dangerous, 2 main reasons. One is that they don't have a gripper underneath them. They either don't come with it, or the homeowner did not put one underneath it. So you can step on it and slip. So what's the point of that? I really don't understand. The second reason is that the rug itself is too thick. Now, many people, as they get older, they don't raise their leg or foot up as high as they used to when they were younger. It's just part of getting older. Some people end up just shuffling. But my point is, if you don't raise your foot or leg up high enough, you aren't going to clear a taller or a thicker throw rug, and you'll end up tripping over it. Now, it could also be that there's a curl at the edge of the rug, or there's a bump in the middle. The rug may be old and lumpy, whatever, and you're going to trip over that. But all of that is simply because you're not raising your foot or leg high enough to cover over that. And then you fall, and you can suffer all kinds of head injury or fractures or God knows what else. I mean, it's just simply not worth it. But I understand that throw rugs are whatever, a need that some people just feel they need to have. But if you could persuade yourself to get rid of at least some or most of them, or hopefully work with an elderly loved one to help to persuade them. But that's how it was. I know my own mother had throw rugs on top of carpeting, which that really drove me crazy, but what are you going to do? The best you can. Now, I know you want to avoid falling as much as possible as you get older. We all do, of course. And as I said at the beginning, it's not, there's no 100% guarantee that you won't, but you at least want to try. I know you want to avoid being one of these patients, or being in a story by another occupational therapist or physical therapist telling someone else a story about how you felt. Just a silly little thing. So be careful. Think about these patients as you get along your day, and hopefully they will help you to second guess or to think a little bit further before you take a step, or just to be a little extra careful. Okay, in the next video, we're going to go over the tips in our fall prevention checklist, and that will help you further to figure out ways on how to avoid falls, some of which I kind of mentioned here anyway. All right, again, don't forget to subscribe, click the like button, and I hope this information was useful for you. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.